And we're very glad to welcome to the Conservative Commandos Grover Norquist. And he is the president of Americans for Tax Reform. ATR is a taxpayer advocacy group that he founded at President Reagan's request. And ATR works to limit the size and cost of the government and opposes higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels. And Grover, welcome back. Welcome back to Conservative Commandos. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
The economy, inflation, and immigration top the list of voter concerns going into the final 2 weekends of the election. Where does the nation stand on the question of whether taxes are too high? Grover Norquist, what say you?
There was not me, but our friends at the Gallup polling company just did their study that they do on a regular basis every year or every election. And they asked, do you pay too much in taxes? Should you pay more in taxes, or is it okay? Pretty much all right. And 56% of Americans said that they pay too much in taxes. 56%. That is the majority. That gets you 270 trillion electoral votes, 56%. And I don't know if it's 4 people or 4%. 4% say they wish they were paying more, that they should pay more, 4%. That's Hillary Clinton and Obama and Kamala Harris. There's got to be a fourth person in there. It is an overwhelming, and by the way, independents, 60% of independents, 56% of everybody, 60% of independents particularly think they're overtaxed. And since that's the swing group of voters that everybody's wisely focused on in terms of winning an election, that should tell you what to focus on. And Kamala Harris wants to talk about everything except taxes. And Trump, in every one of his speeches, goes on a riff about reducing everyone's individual income taxes, as he did in 2017, and reducing the corporate income tax, which is really paid by workers in lower wages, and consumers in higher prices, and retirees in lower returns on their life savings. So the corporate income tax hits everybody except some guy named Mr. General Motors, who doesn't exist, by the way. Companies are a piece of paper that says we're the company. The real people in a company who pay taxes are the workers, the consumers, and the people who are investing for their retirement in that company, among other companies. Trump's position is he hasn't met a tax he doesn't want to cut. He wants to not tax tips. I think that's a great idea, much too intrusive to have to ask people, how much did that guy give you in quarters? I don't know. You would keep track of all that? We're going to come and look for the cash in your house. What are they going to do to police that? That's acceptable in a free society. So, series of tax cuts, both on small businesses. And Kamala Harris wants to raise taxes on small businesses, which, by the way, are usually people, okay? A small business is often an individual paying the taxes for his small shop through his personal income taxes. So there is a person, and you know who it is. And they know who they're doing. So they're going in different directions. Kamala Harris, higher taxes. Trump, lower taxes. If the press wasn't screaming about other issues to confuse, this election would have been over in March.
Grover, when you look at these two campaigns, taxes does seem to be an element in both of them. As you said, Donald Trump is looking to cut the income tax, cut taxes on tips. He also wants to eliminate the tax on Social Security, which I'm in favor of since I get Social Security. I'll leave that section to Rick Manning because Rick wrote an article about that in the Daily Torch. But as far as why don't people understand that when Kamala Harris says, I'm going to tax businesses, I'm going to tax corporations, why don't people understand that when she says that, what she's saying is she's going to raise the taxes on everyone. Businesses and corporations, they don't have a money tree that can just pick the money off of. That every dollar that comes into a business or a corporation comes in through the customer. And we are the customers. That every business and corporation deals with one of either two things, either a service or a product. And they sell those services and products to all of us. We are their consumers. And that they really don't pay taxes. They do the collection of the taxes. And I've never been able to understand why the general public just doesn't get that.
I have cheerful news for you, because the general public gets it a lot more than you and I might. At Americans for Tax Reform, we did a lot of polling and then focus groups on just this question, because the big ticket item in the Trump tax cut was reducing the corporate income tax. Reagan did that. Kennedy did that as part of their pro-growth tax cuts that were very important. But it had been 40 years since Reagan did it, and it had been 60 years since Kennedy did it. So a lot of people don't remember that. So we did focus groups and polling, and we asked people, who do you think pays the corporate income tax? And I was very pleasantly surprised that many Americans, maybe half of Americans, get that the corporate income tax is a tax on you and me in disguise, that it hits consumers and it hits workers. That's who pays that. We all pay it. And anyone who tells you, I'm not going to shoot you, I'm going to shoot the thing in front of you, is lying when they as to the impact of that tax. Cigarette taxes are not paid by cigarettes, even though you call them cigarette taxes. Beer taxes are not paid by cans of beer. They're paid by consumers. And the tax on businesses, corporations, are taxes on consumers and taxes on workers. And this election shows you, I mean, if Kamala Harris was believed, I'm not going to raise anybody's taxes. She almost sounds like a Republican, except for 2% over here, right? But people don't believe that, or she'd be winning. She's not winning. It's very close.
One of her proposals is a tax on unrealized gains. Number one, how can that be constitutional? Number two, don't people understand what an unrealized gain is? In other words, if the value of their house goes up, they have to pay a tax on it. If they should happen to own a stock, or if if they're invested in any way, that they're going to have to pay a tax on the increased value of the stock, even if they don't sell that stock or sell that house. Do they understand what that could possibly mean to them, to their futures?
I am surprised that when I go on TikTok on this subject or tweet, it gets more attention than usual. I thought it was esoteric. Usually when people give things new funny names, it's because they're trying to lie to you. Unrealized capital gains, which is an awful lot like not capital gains, okay? The value of your car goes up because it's old. The value of your house goes up. The value of your land goes up. The value of your 401k, your individual retirement, goes up. And then the government's going to come in and say, your life savings that you're going to retire on has increased in value in the last year. We're going to tax that as income. And you say, but I don't have income. I didn't sell it. I'm holding on to it. I can sell it someday, pay taxes then. No, we're going to collect the taxes now. When the value of your house goes up, it's not just the local property tax guys who decide to raise your property taxes. They're going to say, you have not recognized income. And we're going to tax that income that you haven't recognized because it doesn't exist as income. And it's really just a desperate grab to have a tax on somebody's assets, on somebody's life savings. It's a tax on your savings in your house, your savings in land, your savings in your retirement. And they want to call it something other than a tax on your life savings because that kind of sounds like they're picking over your carcass. And people really object to that. In polls, they object to it 3-1. It's not the winner they thought it was going to be, so they haven't said they've changed their mind. They still plan to do it. They're just not talking about it a lot.
This time, at this time, we're in a campaign season. The idea of, I'm going to make those people pay their fair share. And I always think of that kind of as the jealousy tax. But this idea of their fair share, where's that line in the sand? They never define where that line in the sand is as far as their fair share. Does this drive you crazy too? Drives me crazy.
I certainly understand why they do it. And because the Republicans have been so successful since 1994, they've won Congress half the time, both the House and the Senate half the time. The previous 62 years, they won Congress twice for 4 of 62 years. Since they took the pledge, 90% of them took the pledge and kept it, they now get to keep Congress half the time. The Republican Party is competitive at the national level. It wasn't for 62 years. We had a one-party state. Republican presidents could slow things down, but everything kept moving in the direction of the left's agenda, sometimes more slowly because Nixon was president or Reagan was president, but they kept going. Until 94, now they only win Congress half the time, and so they pass something, we unpass it. They're not able to do what they used to do. The Democrats saw that the Republicans were winning elections by promising not to raise taxes and said, we can do something like that. We'll promise a lot of the voters we won't loot them. We're not going to promise everybody. And then we're going to promise just these few people will get mugged. Every time they did that successfully, they won with Clinton promising not to tax most people. They won with Obama promising not to tax most people. And they won with Biden. And they're trying to do it with this lady, okay? But every time each of those people won, they immediately moved to tax the middle class. And the press didn't complain about it. There
No,
were 8 middle class tax increases in Obamacare alone.
Hey, Grover, one last question, then we'll
Yeah,
take a break. I know that Rick Manning wants to get into this conversation.
good.
Grover, one of the advantages I have being older than dirt, I have some sort of a memory left. I have memory of past presidential elections, like when Walter Mondale came out and promised a tax increase. Boy, that shot his ideas down. We had another president, George Bush, who said no new taxes, then went back on that pledge, lied about it. Guess what? We kicked his butt out the next election. But it is the idea of a politician promising more taxes. Does that have the same effect today? What do these polls tell us, that these promises to raise taxes, do they still have the same effect today that they had in past years? When you look at the polls will tell us the two big issues is the border and inflation. Talk with us about, are the American people just numb to the idea that they know they're going to pay new taxes irregardless?
I would point out the Republicans control more states than the Democrats do, more governorships than the Democrats do. And 2/3 of all the Republican governors have taken the pledge never to raise taxes. The state legislators have made that commitment. Vast majorities of the House and the Senate Republicans have. All the Republicans running for president going back quite some ways have all made that commitment. I think the Republican Party benefits from being the party that won't raise your taxes. Now, it may invade small countries they can't pronounce, may do other things to irritate you, but they won't raise your taxes. That gets them Congress half the time to start with. And then there's some other things that they could do as well. Spending would be nice to keep spending down. And they certainly work on deregulation as there's much more to be done. Taxes remain a central issue. The press often can create an issue, and when there's a thing about drugs, everybody's panicked about illegal drugs, and they talk about it all day, and it spikes as the number one issue, and the press stops talking about it, and it stops being the number one issue. There's still a problem. It hasn't really changed. But some issues the press can highlight, but on taxes, the establishment press does not want to talk about taxes because it damages their.
Hey, Grover, appreciate that you can hold through another segment
Sure.
here in the Conservative Commandos, and that's who we are. I'm Rick Trader. My co-host today is Rick Manning, and our guest this segment is Grover Norquist, who's the president of Americans for Tax Reform, and we're discussing a new Gallup poll that says 56% of all Americans think taxes are too high. We need to talk to those other 44% and give them a little education. Don't go away. We'll be back with our guest, Grover Norquist, right after this break. And welcome back. Welcome back to the Conservative Commandos radio show with Rick Manning and yours truly, Rick Trader, coming to you from the My Pillow Studios and My Store Studios of the AUN TV network. And hey, what's on tap for AUN tonight? Obviously, the Conservative Commandos, but also the Stone Zone with Roger Stone, Danessa Souza's podcast, the Joe Messina Show, James O'Keefe Media, Washington Watch with Tony Perkins, Colonel Alan West, steadfast and loyal. Hey, and maybe real soon another show, the ATR show with Grover Norquist. We're hoping that show real soon to our lineup here at AUN. Our guest this segment is Grover Norquist, and he is the president of Americans for Tax Reform, and we're discussing taxes. In fact, a lot of people are discussing taxes. There's a new Gallup poll out there that has said that 56% of all Americans think taxes are too high. And hey, Grover, thank you for holding through that break. And I got Rick Manning here, and I know Rick wants to get into this conversation. Rick?
Thanks, Rick. Grover, first of all, how are you doing? You doing okay?
Doing well.
You
Good to
holding
see
it
you.
up in this election season?
We're going to make it.
Yeah, I think so too. The one of the things Kamala Harris and Joe Biden used to talk a lot about was getting rid of the Trump tax cuts. And the Trump and they talked about it a lot as if it was a bad thing, the Trump tax cuts. Gee, if we just have him tied to the Trump tax cuts, we can beat him. And they're very silent on that for maybe 3 or 4 months. Tell me, she also says she isn't going to raise taxes on the middle class or anybody who makes under $400,000 and all those promises. If you get rid of the Trump tax cuts, aren't you in fact raising taxes on the exact people she promises not to raise taxes on?
Yes. And when Obama was in exactly this position, because the George W. Bush tax cuts were going to be 10 years old and expiring, he agreed with the Republicans for 85% of that to be continued and made permanent, okay? 85%. Something like that would happen even if the Democrats had the presidency or one of the bodies, because the tax cuts are so popular. They benefit all Americans at all income levels. The lie that it's just rich people is exposed because the Democrats are scared to look people in the eye and say, I'm going to get rid of this piece of the Trump tax cut and this piece, because those pieces are very popular and important to individuals. I believe that at the end of the day, even if the Republicans don't win the presidency in both houses, that virtually almost all of the Trump tax cuts will be made permanent. Remember, the corporate income tax is already permanent. So the thing the Democrats think is their softest target, they can't touch.
They have to touch with a completely new bill when it gets 60 in the Senate.
Yeah.
Good luck. Yeah, but let's talk about those individual tax cuts, because the fact of the matter is, it drives me nuts when I read stuff from the Congressional Budget Office, for instance, that talks about if you take Trump's plan, which extends the Trump tax cuts, and you take that plan, it's going to cost the government blank amount of money. Doesn't that assume that it's the government's money and not ours?
It is. And what you just said is the way I recommend all people listen to their politicians. If the guy asking you to vote for him or her for Congress, Senate, President, Governor refers to tax cuts as losing money, they're standing in the shoes not of you and your family. They're standing in the shoes of the government, and tax cuts is losing money. My lovely money is disappearing. Fagan at the end when stuff falls out. Anyway, most people realize the tax increases are costing them.